do this constantly, that USCIS is the one branch of Homeland Security that's involved with immigration that is not a law enforcement agency in the sense that we do not have the authority to either arrest you or to detain you. We don't have that authority. But no matter how many times that I tell an audience this, I'm still from the government, and people are sometimes afraid to come in when there's a G-man present in the building. So there's concerns. Now it may be because they haven't been admitted to the United States, they have no documentation, whatever the reason happens to be, it's irrelevant to us. What we're answering questions is I would like to find out what benefits are available, what are the eligibility requirements for those benefits, and how do I apply for it if I wish to apply for it? How much is it going to cost? Is there a fee waiver available? Even questions, how long is it going to take? And I can give you a guess on that, but I'm getting the information off of the USCIS.gov website. Now what I also do is I go out and I put on presentations that I refer to as Immigration 101, because that's the name that's been given to it. And essentially what that does, that explains what immigration in the United States is all about, generally. And most people who come out to that course are people who have come from another country and they're interested in finding that out. The people who should be coming to that course are the voters and the citizens of the United States, because they don't think they totally understand what the immigration process is all about unless they've personally gone through it. So it's not a bad idea to put that on for the general public as well. So that's Immigration 101. We also put that class on for educators who are educating people in English as a second language or citizenship courses. And we put that course on so they can ask questions of USCIS. I don't have all the answers. I'm not going to claim that I do. But when I get a question that I don't have the answer for, I'll find the answer for you and I'll get back to you on it. So that's what I do. The second course we put on is Naturalization 101. Naturalization 101 is the big issue right now. When President Biden was sworn in as President of the United States, within 2 weeks of his being sworn in, he issued Executive Order 14012. That order is an all-of-government approach to supporting naturalization and making people who have come here to the United States from other countries to integrate those people into our community and to make them part of our community. That's the history of the United States, actually part of the history of the United States. As everyone knows, our history is not as pure as the driven snow. There's ups and downs as we go along because there's politics. That's human nature. Every country that you've come from has the same situation one way or another. We're no different in that regard. But we do have a democracy here, and we still have it, and it's important that we keep it. And you're part of that solution. The communities that you come from and coming into the United States, integrating into the United States, is the history of America, and it makes our country stronger. So it's very important to get that information out and across to people. Naturalization 101, what I go through is what the eligibility requirements are. I go through them briefly, and then I get down deep into what each of those eligibility requirements are about and how they work, so that people who are interested in applying for naturalization have a good understanding when they go to the 20-page application form to fill out for naturalization, how to answer the questions when you're going through that form with their own history, of course. I also try in my presentations to speak up about UPIL. UPIL, again, as the FOD was telling you earlier, is an acronym, and it stands for Unlawful Practice of Immigration Law. And it's a very serious problem. If you use the internet, if you communicate with anybody in any form, some of your personal information may be vulnerable out in the ether. And there are people out there who are looking for that information. If they have your personal information, they can open up bank accounts in your name for your address. And when you fill out an application for naturalization, what's on the application for naturalization? Everything. All your personal information is on that. So you have to be extremely careful about who you're sharing that information with. One example, you fill out an application for naturalization, you're nervous about your English ability. So what are you going to do? You're practicing, you're going through the questions. So you decide that you're going to take your application and you're going to ask somebody who speaks English a little bit better than you, can you ask me the questions here so I can practice for the interview? You better trust that person extremely well. If that person is an immediate family member, all your information is on that document. Your social security number, your date of birth, your address, your email address, your name, your parents' names, your children's names. Your entire history is there. So if you're doing that, you have to be very, very careful. Number one, either that you're using a blank page, and when they ask you your name, you say your name is John Smith, even though your name may be Carmen Velasquez. So you're not giving your same name, you're not giving your same date of birth, you're not giving your social security number, you're not giving your exact address, you're not giving your exact email address. You can do it that way, or you can go to one of the classes that are available to you, either through one of the accredited representatives, and I'm going to speak about what an accredited representative is. And those are people who are entitled, who have a legal authorization to assist you to fill out your application, and even to arrange for you to get legal advice in regard to how to process that application form. Say you have some difficulty in your immigration history, or you have a criminal offense, and you want to know before you file your application whether this is going to be a problem when you come in for your naturalization interview. These people can help you. They're not attorneys, but they work for agencies that have registered both with USCIS and the U.S. Department of Justice, the Immigration Court. And you are authorized by them for a period of time to provide accredited representative to people who are applying for naturalization benefits. These agencies must be nonprofit agencies. They must put a priority on providing services to low-income communities so that it makes filing an application with USCIS approachable for people who may not be able to afford an attorney. If you can afford an attorney, how do you go about getting an attorney? You go down to the local bodega and say, who did you use when you applied for immigration? That may be a good thing. That may be a terrible thing.
That's right.
There are some attorneys who are out there who may not be totally on the up and up. I think it was relatively recent that There's an attorney that's been charged and has been sentenced to prison time for violating immigration laws, for scamming people. And so that's the world that we live in. And there's a Latin phrase that you need to at least understand, and the Latin is the Roman Latin term, caveat emptor. Let the buyer beware. So if you're going to go to somebody to obtain assistance to file your application, they're going to have access to your personal information, and they're going to be maybe helping you fill out the form. They're maybe giving you legal advice that you need before you file the application. Then you want to make sure you have the right person who's doing that, and you want something in writing that says, what is this person or this group going to do for me, and what is the fee that I'm going to be paying? That you have that in writing, you know who you're dealing with, so if something does go wrong, then you have an action. You may be able to bring this to court and get your money back if the person doesn't provide the service that's being offered to you. Again, I'm going back to the Accredited Representative program. When people apply to be an accredited representative, they submit an application both to the Department of Justice and also to USCIS. And we will make recommendation to the Department of Justice that we know this group and they're actively involved in helping people. We've been dealing with this group for a number of years. We know the people who are involved, and they're providing good services, and we'll make that recommendation. Other times we'll take a look at an accredited representative that's applying for a renewal of their accreditation. And we see with the renewal that this person has gone through 3 hours of continuing education in the last 3 years since they've been made an accredited representative. Automatically brings in question in my mind as to whether the person is up to date with what they're doing. How many cases have they been assisting with over the past couple of years? Now, it's not always definitive there because there's accredited representatives in the House, because an accredited representative who's dealing day in and day out with filing applications, N-485s or N-400s, N-600s or I-485s for individual, they're usually up to date with what's going on. They're usually communicating with the attorney in the office or a pro bono attorney that's providing legal advice. So they're pretty much up to date, but they should also be taking courses as well to make sure that they're getting the most recent information. And there's locations where they can get that education. So we'll go through, we'll make a recommendation, and it's the Department of Justice that will make the decision as whether the person is accredited initially or re-accredited when they apply for re-accreditation. And we have the list of accredited representatives on our website. So I'm going to go very quickly through this PowerPoint here. And it's going to be very rapidly because I've talked in a long period of time. I don't want to slow things down. Many of you know about naturalization here in the room. I'm going to be going through the eligibility requirements, lickety-split. At the end, if there's any questions about what I've covered, then we'll open it up for questions. So the agenda here is that I'm going to give you just a breakdown of the immigration agencies and the Department of Homeland Security, the eligibility requirements for naturalization. I'm not going to go through the breakdown of those eligibility requirements unless there's questions about it. I've already gone through what UPIL is. You're going to see 1 or 2 slides up there about UPIL, but I'm not going to spend a great deal of time on this because I've already gone through it. What an accredited representative is, I've already gone through that, so if there's questions, you can ask that at the end. And there's some in here, some information in here on online tools, and I want you to see the resources that are available online for anyone who chooses to take a look at it. And if you don't have the internet in your home, you don't have a computer in your home, you can always go to the public library, and they will assist you in finding this information. So in 2001, as everyone, maybe not everyone, I think I may be dating myself, there may be people here who were children at the time when we had the bombing at the Twin Towers in New York City on September 11, 2001, and also in Washington, D.C., and we had the plane go down in Pennsylvania. And we also had an anthrax scare at that same period of time. Congress got together and they made a decision. For those of you who were around, you'll understand it. They said, how did this happen here? How did we not know that there was a threat here? Well, it was a failure to connect the dots between different agencies in the United States. So Congress decided that they were going to create a new department, the Department of Homeland Security. And they worked on it. In November of 2002, they voted the Department of Homeland Security Act. And as a result of that act, 22 of the organizations that existed in the United States were combined into the Department of Homeland Security.
Sorry, excuse me, the date that you have on is in 2002?
25th. Oh, yeah.
That's wrong.
Typo, very sorry.
And I say, wow.
It'll be created later this year.
Yes.
Later this year. Ignore
Under the
that.
Department of Homeland Security, there are 3 agencies that are involved with immigration. Then they took over from one agency that existed before, and that agency was the INS, Immigration and Naturalization Service. The Homeland Security Act did away with the INS and created 3 agencies. Those agencies are ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, CBP, Customs and Border Protection, and USCIS, Citizenship and Immigration Services. That's our agency. 2 of those agencies are law enforcement agencies. ICE is a law enforcement agency and CBP is a law enforcement agency. USCIS is not a law enforcement agency in the sense that we cannot arrest and cannot detain. We do follow the laws of the United States, and we will take actions to make sure those laws are followed.
Sean, the questions are for the end, or could I ask a question related to the...
Yes, you can.
Is USCIS sharing information with the other 2 parts?
To a certain extent, yes. What we do not do is if I go out to a community and make a presentation, what gets said in that hall pretty much stays in that hall. It's not directed at any particular individual. So I'm not taking notes and saying who's asking this question and who's asking that question and sending that back. What I do is I do make a report every time I do an engagement. I say how many people attended, what the engagement was about, and if there are questions that come up during the question and answer period that I think headquarters needs to know about. For example, such and such is happening with this application, this type of delay is happening, or this mistake is being made by USCIS. That information I put on that report, so we're aware of our problems. And if there's an unusual question that comes in, I'll mention the unusual question. People are very interested in the U4U program. People are very interested in the Afghans parole program and this aspect of it. I'll let them know that so they have a general sense of what programs they should be offering out to the public to inform the public. But that's the limit of it. There's no such thing as there were 14 people in my engagement today who had no authorization to be here in the United States. They haven't been admitted to the United States. That doesn't happen. All right? Does that answer your question?
Yes.
One other thing I want to be upfront about. And it happened right here in Lawrence, and you need to be aware of it. In 2017, people came in for an interview at USCIS Lawrence. And there were several of those people who had orders of deportation, but they were coming in for an interview. If USCIS knows beforehand that somebody is coming in for an interview that has an arrest order or an order of deportation, we're required to let ICE know about it and CBT know about it. So they're informed of it. And when that happened, ICE, a new administration then, came in and they made several arrests here in Lawrence. And that hit the newspapers, and specifically the way that it hit the newspapers was that USCIS is conspiring with ICE to entrap people who come into their office to arrest them. That did not happen. ICE, CBP, and USCIS are three agencies involved with applying the immigration laws of the United States here in the United States. We don't apologize for that. If you come in for an application and you don't meet the eligibility requirements, we're going to deny you. That's our responsibility. If you come in and you meet the eligibility requirements, we're going to approve you. That's our responsibility. But this is the United States of America, and we share the information with these brother agencies in that regard. You have an order of deportation, somebody is listed to come in for an interview on this particular date. Sometimes, and even the date that this happened, the attorneys for some of these people knew that ICE may come in and pick the person up when they came in for the interview. That came out in the press many weeks afterwards. But the attorneys knew that that is the practice of USCIS. Again, we don't apologize for that, but the determination as to whether to come and make the arrest is ICE. So they made a determination. They've been receiving that type of information for years prior to 2017. And they had very rarely come in and picked up anyone at USCIS at an interview. For some reason, they made the determination to make a point that day to bring 5 people in, to come and arrest 5 people. I'm not going to speak to what was on ICE's mind or why they decided to do that particular day. That's beyond my area to be responsible for too. But you need to know that basically this is the United States government agency. We're responsible to adhere to the law. We do cooperate with other agencies in the United States government. That's what the Department of Homeland Security is all about. Mm-hmm. But the determination made by ICE is ICE's determination and not USCIS. And I'll guarantee you one point is that there was no collusion between USCIS and ICE for that particular day. That law case is still going on and is being, it's a lawsuit against ICE. And we've been dragged into that for our part of it, but as far as I know, that hasn't been resolved. So I hope that answers your question probably in too great detail. So the eligibility requirements, you must be 18 years old to naturalize. You must be a permanent resident for the appropriate period of time to be considered for naturalization. You must have continuous residence in the United States. That means that when you get your green card, that the day that you get your green card, you don't go to another country and live there for 3 years and then decide to come back and apply for citizenship. You're saying you're a permanent resident of the United States. You either live here or you don't. That's what continuous residence is about. You must have physical presence in the United States. So So there's nothing wrong with a permanent resident traveling outside of the United States, and sometimes people in business do a lot of travel outside of the United States. But to be eligible to naturalize in the United States, you must have been physically present in the United States for more than half of the statutory period. I'm using a term here, statutory period, and simply what's meant by statutory period is there are a number of ways that you can apply for naturalization in the Immigration and Nationality Act. One statute is Statute 316. If you're applying Statute 316, you've been a permanent resident for 5 years. That's usually the way that people apply for naturalization. They come in, they're a permanent resident, 5 years, and then they apply to USCIS for naturalization. Then there's Section 319. That means that the person has been a permanent resident of the United States for 3 years. And the person is also a spouse of a United States citizen living in a bona fide marriage with that United States citizen spouse for 3 years. So that's 319. So the statutory period under 319 is 3 years. Statutory period under 316 is 5 years. There are other sections of law that cover it. You've got, you can become a citizen of the United States if you're a child of somebody who naturalizes. So that's filing the N-600. I'm not going to get into that today. If you have military history, there are other statutes under which you can apply to become a citizen of the United States. And you must have lived 90 days within the jurisdiction where you filed when you file your application for naturalization. You must be of good moral character. You must have an understanding of the English language, and that means that you must be able to speak, understand English to the extent that you can get through the naturalization interview and understand the questions that are on the application form and be able to answer those questions. You must also be able to read a sentence in English and write a sentence in English. And you must have a knowledge of United States government and history, and that's the 100 civics questions. So we give you the 100 civics questions and 100 civics answers. We'll ask you 10 of those questions. You need to get 6 of those correct in order to be able to pass the test. Finally, you need to have attachment to the United States Constitution, and you need to take the oath of allegiance. If you're approved for naturalization, you come in, you raise your hand, you're going to swear that you're going to give up allegiance to other countries, you're going to give your allegiance to the United States and follow the laws and the Constitution of the United States. So I've gone through most of these eligibility requirements, and I'm jumping through to this particular.
I have a question before you continue.
Sure.
Can I? Have you ever approved an application and then you call the applicant to deny the application? If you have, why does it happen?
Well,
Are you saying after the person was approved?
Yes.
Yeah, so I can jump in on this question. So sometimes you will have situations, I'll just give one that probably happens most often. You have a person and they get approved. And then we run security checks as we prepare to put the person into ceremony. And then what happens is the person commits a crime and they get arrested. And then we find out about it as we're running our last minute checks before the ceremony. So on the day of the ceremony, they come in and we say, hey, our records indicate that, something has happened, please explain. And so we will ask them for what's going on. Let's say they got arrested for burglary and the case is still ongoing. Okay, now if it's something minor like a traffic incident, we just ask for proof of it and we will usually let that person go on ahead and naturalize. But if it's something serious like burglary or theft or something, we need to know what's going on. Then we ask them, is the case completed? No, the case is not completed, it's still ongoing, okay? One of the regulations says that if you have a currently pending court case, you cannot be, I see heads nodding like this, that's correct, you cannot become a U.S. citizen. So in that situation, we would pull that person from ceremony and then we issue what's called a notice of receipt of derogatory information after grant. It's a very long sentence for basically like a request for evidence. And we say, hey, we know that you were arrested after your interview before the ceremony. You need to provide us paperwork for this. And then depending on what has happened with that case, we'll determine what we do. If they give us documentation and it shows that the case is still ongoing and it's been continued till the end of the year, that person will, unfortunately, who was once approved, will have to be denied. If it turns out that it was like a case of mistaken identity and actually it was not this person and all the charges are dismissed, in that situation, they give us the paperwork that shows that, we will put that person back into a ceremony, reapprove them, and then naturalize them. So I hope does that answer your question? Okay. And it can be anything. It can be that maybe the person after they get approved, they come in for their ceremony, they leave the country for 6 months or something like that. It can be, typically the situations where we see this type of incident is when the person has a criminal history. But it can be for any of the eligibility requirements that John just mentioned. You travel too long. We're supposed to ask you questions about that. That's why when they come in for the ceremony, they've got that sheet, the 445, and it actually has questions on there. Number 1, have you gotten married, divorced, et cetera, et cetera. Number 2, have you traveled outside the United States since you're as Yep. They recognize that. So, like those questions, we ask those questions because those are the eligibility things that most people typically, if they do something, it's going to be one of those things, and then that's the reason why we would issue the notice.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
So what I'm going to jump in here, because oftentimes we get questions on this, and I just want to go through it so that people here understand it. There is an exemption for the English requirements in the naturalization interview, and by statute, if you are of the age of 50, you are 50 years old or older, and you have been a permanent resident of the United States for 20 years, then you can come in for your interview. I mean, this is at the time of filing your application. You can come in for your interview. You can take your interview in your native language. You can have an interpreter with you. We're not going to ask you to write a sentence or read a sentence in English, and you can have an interpreter help you with the questions and answers as you go through the interview. You're not required to meet the English requirements. If you are age 55 and you have 15 years as a permanent resident, same thing is true. There's no English requirement. You're entitled to have an interpreter, and you still must meet the eligibility requirements in regard to the civics, the history, and the government of the United States. So we're still going to ask you those 10 questions. They can be asked in your native language. We'll use your interpreter. We'll give the question to the interpreter. The interpreter must ask the question, and when the response comes, the interpreter then will interpret back into English for the officer, and you still must pass 6 of the 10 questions in order to be able to pass. If you, yes?
Are the interpreters provided by the USCIS, or the applicant should bring the
No,
interpreter?
we request that the individual bring an interpreter in with them. And that's an important question, because the interpreter cannot be anyone who is under the age of 17, I believe. And in certain circumstances will allow somebody between the age of 14 and 17, but we have to have specific reason to be able to do that, who can interpret. And it also must be somebody whose personal interests are not tied up in the application. So, for example, if you have a person coming in and they're bringing their child in, and the child is under the age of 18, then that child has an interest in whether the parent receives naturalization because they can derive citizenship. Another situation is with an attorney. Your attorney can't interpret for you. Your attorney can be present, can represent you, but can't also be the interpreter. Okay?
That's
So
right.
you need to understand that, and there's a form, it's the 1258 form, I believe. Somebody may be able to correct me on that. That's the interpreter form that needs to be filled out for somebody who's coming in to interpret for a person who's taking the naturalization course. The last category here is people who are over the age of 65 and who have 20 years as a permanent resident. They get an additional benefit. Those individuals do not have to meet the English requirement, the educational requirement for naturalization. They do have to meet the government and civics requirement, but they're special in the sense that they only have to study 20 of the 100 questions that are provided, and they will be asked 10 questions of the 20 questions, so it's an easier exam for those who are over the age of 65 with 20 years or more as permanent residents. Then there's the N648 Medical Certificate of Disability Exception. And this form is for people who have a disability. This is for somebody who has a disability that prevents them from learning English or learning civics and be able to show that they meet the educational requirements for citizenship. In this regard, the individual must have their medical physician fill out their application form. It can be their medical physician, a
Clinical psychologist. Is that what you're talking
Yes.
about? Okay. So medical doctor, clinical psychologist, and there's one more. My officers. What's the third category?
OD.
Huh?
An OD.
An OD? Oh yeah, doctor of osteopathy.
OT?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
That form must be filled out by one of those three individuals. A medical professional. Cannot be filled out by anybody else. If it's filled out by anybody else, it's rejected. Automatic.
No LPNs, no nurses.
It also must be completed. You must complete the questions that are on the form, at least the medical physician must. And if there's an interpreter, you need the interpreter portion of it completed as well. So that needs to be properly filed, and it's now required that that form needs to be filed when the N400 is filed. It can be brought in at the interview, but you need to provide specific reason why it could not have been submitted with your original N400 at the time. A good example for that reason may be that you filed your N400, the medical situation, like a stroke, took place after you filed, so that's obviously would be accepted if it's submitted. The officer must go through that form and make sure that the form is completed properly in order to accept the form. So it's possible that the form may not be accepted at the interview. I briefly mentioned the medical armed forces. I'm not going to get into that. The oath of allegiance is, I've already gone through. What happens at the end is if once you go through and you're approved for naturalization, you then come in for your ceremony. When you come in for your ceremony, you fill out that document, the 445, and that document is going to ask you questions. Has anything taken place since your interview that we need to know about? Have you been arrested? Have you been divorced during that period of time? Have you been separated during that period of time? Because if you're applying under 319, after 3 years of permanent residence, it's required that you're in a continuing marriage with the United States citizen up until the time that you become a citizen of the United States. So the steps to naturalization is you want to determine your eligibility. This particular website here you can find on USCIS, and you can fill it out yourself. And it will provide you a decision as to whether you are eligible for naturalization or not. The thing that helps with is if you're not eligible for it, it's gonna tell you, if you answer those questions correctly, it's gonna tell you, you may have a problem here, you may wanna have that checked out. You're gonna submit the N-400 online or mail it in with fees and other documents. If you're going to ask for a fee waiver, you must submit the fee waiver and the form, the N-400, in paper format. Only if you're requesting a fee waiver. Otherwise, you can file it online. You're going to receive a receipt of application. You're going to then receive a notice to go for your biometrics. You'll then receive a notice to come in for your interview, and then you need to attend the interview. I already went through what UPIL is, the unlawful practice of immigration law. I've gone through the accredited representative. This is our website. And I circled this particular area and that particular area on the website. The website is uscis.gov/tools. Or if you go to uscis.gov, you take a look along the top, and it's going to show you that you have tools right here. You can click on that. You go to tools, you're going to click either here on online tools or here on tools, and it's going to bring you to this website that I'm showing you a part of. Now this is down the tools website. This is the 4th category. I wanted to show you this here, how to find authorized providers. So you click on that, and it automatically brings you to the Department of Justice website, where it's going to show you accredited representatives. Usually you'll click here, listed by state, because you're looking for accredited representatives. So you want to find out who's near you. Then you're going to get a map. You can either click up here on the state of Massachusetts or click here on Massachusetts, and it brings you to this page, which is the first page of 5 pages of accredited representatives in the state of Massachusetts. And it goes alphabetically: Beverly, Boston, and it's going to go down the list. You find an accredited representative that's near you. It's going to tell you who they are, what their phone number is, what their address is, how long they've been a recognized accredited representative, when their accredited representative expires, and whether they're active or not. All that information is there. Then it's up to you, caveat emptor. You may want to check with 2 or 3 of them. You say with it, you call them up, you say, I need to do this, I need to file an I-130. Can you help me file the I-130? How much will it cost? And they'll set up an appointment with you. Then you may want to call somebody else who's close, and you want to shop around to see, what the price would be, which is the best for me. And then you must make a decision and come in for the interview. If you want to select an attorney, the same type of thing applies. You can go online on a website, Massachusetts Bar Association, and they have a website. You can go to the website and ask for a referral for an immigration attorney. They'll give you maybe 1, 2 referrals. Then you want to pick up the phone and talk to the attorney and find out what it's going to cost and whether they can take you now, whether you have to wait. Find out the information. Protect yourself. The same thing is true with AILA. AILA is the American Immigration Lawyers Association. AILA has a website. They'll provide referrals to you as well. You can do the same thing with AILA. These are helpful websites, and if you're taking pictures of this, I would recommend that you do that. The one thing you'll find here that to determine eligibility for naturalization, that's a website that can assist you. To find accredited representatives, you can go to that website and find the accredited representative. If you want to find out when you can legally file, you can go to the early filing calculator. File online, you can go to that. Processing times. Practice the civics test. All of that's available to you online at uscis.gov. That's our website. Be careful when you use the website. There are many websites out there, and some of them try to mimic our website. So you'll see the URL, say uscis.com or uscis.gov.com. So why are they trying to confuse you? That's not USCIS. Why are they trying to confuse you that this is a government site that you can trust? There's a reason why they're trying to confuse you. They're trying to get their hand in your pocket. That's my opinion.
Yep.
And this is a website that you can contact me on, right there. So if there's anything that I can do for you, if these are some other resources that are available to you, then please get in touch with me or get in touch with your local office. We'd be happy to try and help you out as best we can. We have an incentive, Executive Order 14012. There are many in your community here in Lawrence who have been here for many more than 5 years as a permanent resident and are very likely eligible to naturalize. What are the reasons why they're not naturalizing? We suspect there's two primary reasons. The language barrier, number one. And the second thing, how much is it costing to file for naturalization? News. Those fees are not going to go down.
Oh my God. I was thinking you were not gonna say that they were gonna. That was the incentive? They're not gonna count?
Let me go up.
All I can do is tell you the truth.
There you go.
That's the truth. They're not going to go down. And there is under consideration now the submittal for a new fee schedule.
Uh-oh.
So that's coming sometime in the future. You can expect it relatively soon. We are trying as an agency, as much as we possibly can, to keep those fees as low as we can. I happen to be a very big fan of our current director of USCIS. Director Urdu has a good head on her shoulder. She's an attorney.
Is she here?
She's not here today.
There's a picture of her on the wall back there.
But she's been in front of Congress to ask Congress to provide financial support for the humanitarian product that we process through USCIS. Refugees, asylees, parolees coming into the United States who are either coming in with very low fees or no fees at all. Who do you think is paying those fees?
The government.
Why do you think your fees are so high when you apply for an immigration benefit? Because one side is balancing off the other side, that's why. And if anything, the humanitarian situation in the world today indicates, in my mind, it's not going to get better real soon. So we're trying to do what we can. We're trying to get Congress to cover those costs so we don't have to flush up the costs for people who are already here and are looking for applications to naturalize and to be part of our community and part of the strength of the United States. So that's happening. Is it happening quick enough? I'll let you be the judge of that. Are there any questions that we can answer for you?
Can we go to the mayor's office and ask for help about paying out citizenship fees? The mayor's office, can they provide any financial help.
I will not speak for the mayor.
Your city council. Approve it. First approval for the city council, then they sign it.
Serious question.
I see we got some repartee going on. Any other questions that we can help you with? Yes, ma'am.
You know the exception that you were talking about, the language and the medical exception? When they apply for that, and when they put in the application, do they get any type of communication prior to the interview, or they just stay to assume they're gonna get it, they meet the requirements?
No, the way the system is set up is the application gets submitted. It's supposed to be submitted with the N400 now.
Yeah.
So the application gets submitted. Nobody's really looking at that, the medical part of that, because it's for the exception, all right? The exemption, rather. Nobody's really looking at that until it comes to the time of the interview. Then the onus is on the officer who is not medically trained, but needs to take a look at that application and see if on the face of that application, the application is acceptable. So that decision is also going to be made every time those applications are applied for.
We have a policy that specifically governs N648s for the entire agency. So all of our officers have been trained and they get retrained on what the policy says and that this is what we follow. So when they make the decision on the N648, they are looking at the policy, what the agency has said that we should be looking for, and that's how we determine whether the medical is good or not. But in terms of someone who is like 55-15, 65-20, as long as the person, like John says, as long as when you, at the time of filing, you meet those requirements. Sometimes people will try to file, because you're allowed to file 90 days early, that's your right. But the problem is, sometimes when people file 90 days early, then they have 14 years, 9 months as a permanent resident. So then at that time, you don't qualify for an interpreter, okay? So people just need to make sure that when they file their application that they have that 15 years as a resident, that 20 years as a resident. And then for that situation, absolutely, you qualify for an interpreter immediately. Bring your interpreter with you. In some situations, if you don't have an interpreter, we generally try not to turn someone away if we have someone here who speaks the language. But you know, generally, you bring your interpreter in and we do the interview in your native language. So at the N648 is the only time where we actually review something to determine whether you still qualify to use your interpreter, because if the medical gets rejected for whatever reason, then at that point we have to give you two options, which is either to try to take the test in English, all the testing in English, or we will also offer, which I'm actually glad the agency finally did this, is we give the person a chance to request or say that they want to waive the test. And then basically that triggers the what we call a re-exam, which means the person would then come back with a second opportunity. So, any other questions? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I'd like to make it just a further comment on that, and it's not really from the agency, it's from me, but the reason why I'm trying to bring it out is because it'll give you a little bit of context from the USCIS perspective. So when you come into the United States, you travel outside of the United States, maybe you go to Dominican Republic for a holiday, and you come back into the United States. When you come back into the United States, you go through Customs and Border Protection, and what do they want to see? Well, they want to see your green card and they want to see your passport, right? Do they make you show that when you go through? Either you have it or you don't have it. Why is that? Second thing is if you go on the MBTA in Boston and you want to take a subway ride on the green line or the red line, when you go downstairs you have your card, and you used to be able to do it with coins, but now you have your card. So you have to have your card to be able to go through the turnstile. Why is the turnstile? Well, the reason why they ask you for your passport or your green card, and the reason why there's a turnstile, is because some of the people obey the law and some of the people don't. if every application that came into USCIS had 0 fraud and 0 mistakes in it, this would be the easiest job in the world.
Yeah.
No problem. But unfortunately, we live in the world where there is fraud and where there are some people who don't want to pull their weight like everybody else. So we do have these caveats. We need to have people demonstrate that they meet the eligibility requirements in order to be able to get the benefits, and we try to do it fairly across the board.
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Can you clarify to me, I don't know, the differences between preparer and immigration law?
Between which?
A
Preparer
preparer,
and immigration law.
immigration lawyer.
Yes, lawyer, yes, that's what I mean.
So when you say preparer, you're talking about an accredited representative?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
An accredited representative is an individual who is a non-attorney, who has not taken the bar exam in the state in which the individual is working, but has applied to USCIS, the agency that's responsible for adjudicating the applications, and also the Department of Justice, the agency that encompasses EOIR, the Immigration Court. And both of those agencies are taking a look at what's being represented on the part of this person, and have they sufficient education and experience in order to be able to help immigrants to fill out their applications, to file their applications, or to represent them in front of the court. And this is a part of accredited representative I didn't cover. There are 2 accredited representatives, partially accredited and fully accredited. A partially accredited representative is somebody who can assist somebody in filling out an application. If the person has legal issues, that individual probably can take a look at the application and say, I think you may have a legal issue here. We ought to talk to an attorney. So either there's a pro bono attorney who's assisting the agency, or they may have a staff attorney that they can refer this to and get a reading on what needs to be done to assist this person to file properly. So they have they're putting down money for an application, so they have a good shot of getting the benefit that they're looking for. So an accredited representative is a non-attorney that has the experience and training in order to be able to represent you in front of USCIS. That's partially accredited. So they can come in with you to the interview if they filed a G28 form representing the client. We'll send information to that individual about what's coming up with the client. That's permissible. If you're fully accredited, you can represent the client in front of the judge in the immigration court. Now, of course, you've got to demonstrate to us and to the immigration court that you have the higher level of education, training, and experience in order to represent and not waste the court's time, or properly, and that you're capable of properly representing your client.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Oh, sorry, I just want to take a moment. I don't want to embarrass anybody, but we've actually been joined by 2 special guests. So our district director, Dennis Reardon, is standing at the back of the room. He's absolutely. Oh, and let me just, you want to introduce Chris?
No, you please.
Okay. And then standing on the, Chris, throw your hands in the air so they know who you are. That's Chris Maynard. He's a fellow FOD, and he is, what's the name of your office now? It was St. Albans, now it's Burlington. Yeah. So, it's in Vermont.
Hello, Mayor. How are you?
Doing it. Yeah, again.
Any organization needs to have a strong team. And we are blessed with a strong team in Lawrence and in the district. So Shanita Tucker, thank you for the hard work, your strong leadership. Looking back, Joe Forty, the team in the back. These people here these people, this team, this agency, this directorate, we are committed to serving our country and serving all of you. John McCarthy mentioned that many people that aren't eligible for, or that are eligible for naturalization don't take the step toward naturalization. That is unhealthy for this country. I know there are challenges. Language is a big challenge. It is. And we have, I was on a radio program invited by the mayor, and someone said, I came here when I was 67 years old or 72 years old. Is there any allowance for the fact that I don't speak English? I love this country. And there isn't, because a person who's 65 years of age needs to have 20 years of lawful permanent residence. So for that person who's 72 or 68 or 69, to wait 20 years is a long time. And I heard a story told to me by a federal judge in Boston, Judge Wolf, Mark Wolf, talked about a friend of his who was a victim or suffered at the treatment of the Nazis. He was in a camp, and he was released. He was freed by American soldiers. He came to the United States, and he landed in New York. He was very smart, didn't speak the language well, and went, after the 5 years period of permanent residence, you're a refugee for a year, and then you apply for a permanent residency. He applied for citizenship, and he went into the immigration officer, and he didn't do very well on the exam. His English was weak. And the immigration officer said, I'm sorry, I cannot pass you today. You just don't meet the requirement to understand, speak English. And he said, I understand enough English to say to you that I love this country, and I want to contribute to this country, and I will be a good citizen. And the man related that the immigration officer said, that's good enough for me, stamped up and approved.
Wow.
Yeah.
We can't do that. We can't do that. That person, we'd like to do that, but we can't do it. But I tell you that story to make the point we understand how people feel. We're empathetic to those feelings. But the law is written in a way, and we are obligated to follow it, but we are mindful that is a big hurdle. We're also mindful that there's a feeling in the Dominican community that if I become a citizen, somehow I sacrifice my rights in the Dominican Republic. To own property, maybe to vote. The people, I am told, feel that way. But at the same time, at Faneuil Hall or at the Kennedy Library, the majority of people, the ethnic group, is the Dominican Republic. There's a cheer when the Dominican Republic is called out by the judge. So many people step forward. So I don't know how real that or deeply rooted that misunderstanding is, but we have to attack that. And for us as a nation, we cannot have to flourish and to go on, and I have great hope in our future. And people that say, oh, things are terrible, well, if you read the newspapers in the 1890s, things were terrible. And they were terrible hundreds and thousands of years ago. People wrote about how things are not as good as they were. Our future is bright. But it's only bright if we are a strong people, a united people, who take pride in our citizenship, and that bonds us together. And for those of you who do become citizens, you make great sacrifices. Citizenship isn't handed to you. Many of you come without the language. You have to learn the language. You have to study. You have to pass the history and government test. And it's not easy to go into an immigration office and sit before an immigration officer. In many countries abroad, there's a fear of the government. And there's a fear of just going through a process. I mean, just going in for a driver's license. You know, am I going to pass this test? You know, but you have the courage. People have the courage, and they do it, and they're successful. One last story. A week ago, tomorrow a week, or last Friday a week, which will be a week tomorrow, we had a naturalization ceremony to commemorate Citizenship Day. It was in the State House. And I mentioned this on the radio program. The special guest speaker was the Chancellor of the University of Massachusetts in Boston. He is a man from Argentina. He came to this country at the age of 17. His mother, 3 of his schoolmates went missing. And I guess it was a period of civil unrest in Argentina, the dirty war, and his mother said, "You need to leave." And he had a B2 visa. And all he had was $45 in his pocket and the clothes he was wearing. And he left. Landed in Los Angeles. It was $45. It wasn't $100. Maybe it was $75. Let me correct it. $75. And I said to him, jokingly but also seriously, in a sense, how did you get by the immigration officer? 17 years of age, a one-way ticket, and $75 in your pocket. That's not someone. I started in '78, and that wasn't someone that would be clearly admissible. But the person, he was admitted, and he came in, and his first job was pumping gas. And then he went to classes, English as a second language, went to a community college, and his teacher saw something in him. And he helped him to gain admission to the University of California at Berkeley. And from there, he went to Harvard University. He became a tenured professor, was the dean of a school at the UCLA, and now is the chancellor of the University of Massachusetts in Boston. A great immigrant story. My immigrant story is that my father and mother were immigrants from a poor country, Ireland. They had little education, and my father literally raised us with a shovel. And I'm proud of that. But America is for everyone. It's for everyone. So, you're blessed with the leadership we have in Lawrence. John McCarthy, who has traveled every section of this state, I simply believe John and Jan Owen, who's our community relations officer in the Buffalo region. We have the best 2 community relation officers in the agency. I truly believe that. And this man that is here with me, he is from a rural area in Vermont, not too far from, it was St. Albans, not too far from the Canadian border, but he is shaping a new field office in Burlington. But people are people. There's challenges in terms of, we were talking on the way up, what can we do to have more people go forward for citizenship? And Chris mentioned that Canadians are also reluctant to pursue citizenship because they're under the impression that they will lose some benefit in their home country. And they normally wait until they retire. So we're going to try and look at that because we need people, again, joining this family, making us stronger. So to the CBOs, thank you for your great work. To the City of Lawrence, the leadership, thank you for your great work and your partnership with us. And I think success will be having more people apply for citizenship. We're talking about ways that maybe the test could be administered ahead of applying for citizenship. Taking that pressure off people when they go in for the interview. I've passed the English requirement. I've passed the history and government. Now I can focus on the questions the officer asks me and respond to that. sometimes the fear of that test kind of puts us in a sort of quicksand, and we're not focused on the questions, and we're not responsive in the ways we should be. Can we make the test fair? Can we make the process fair? So there's a lot of leadership, a lot of knowledge at our headquarters that are wrestling with all these questions now. So any questions for me? That's okay, it's an easy day. God bless you all.
Any final questions? Come on, we're here to answer questions. No questions? All right. So we're gonna go ahead and, any final words, John?
Yes. You should never ask that question. I'm sorry. You will find in the back of this hall, this document. And I want to point to this document in particular. For any group who is interested in providing any type of educational training for people who wish immigration benefits, it is dated. This was printed in 2009.
Yes.
But a lot of the information in there is how to avoid recreating the wheel. This has been done before. People have developed groups to assist immigrants, learn what they've done and what works and what doesn't work. And it also has references in there for information that you may find helpful if that's what your intent is. I just wanted to point it out. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I need your help now because, so we've run just a little bit over, but that's okay because this is